Whatever you say nothing when you talk about you know what. For if you know should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, and you wouldn't know how long. So for you know whose sake, don't let anyone hear you singing this song. This first-person film, set in the 1950s, reminds us how Catholic grammar schools insisted on blind obedience. The system was a bully, thriving on parents and children being shamed into silence. The author's answer was resistance, mocking his tormentors as the twisted paper tigers they were. Starting as early as 5 years old, he fought against their unfairness and found standing up for yourself was its own reward. But those powers insisted on whatever you say nothing. Luck. When folks say to me, "You must have lucky Irish," I reply, "Luck is it? Is it lucky to have an unfinished revolution for over 800 years? At the age of 8, I started my own revolution, resisting brutality. I told my father as he punched me, "I don't care how much you hit me. I'm not crying anymore." I resisted going into the U.S. Army because they were just like an institutional version of my father. They didn't respect individual thinking, morality, or independence. They saw creative or sensitive people as weak. They were bullies. I knew I would resist them as I resisted my father. And I knew from clashes with other authorities, they always had systems to intimidate those who would not conform. When I tell my stories about resisting the Army brass to veterans who served in the 60s like I did, the overwhelming majority of them responded, "You're lucky they didn't kill you." Serendipity seemed to help just as much as my stubborn refusal to bow down to the brass when they were breaking their own regulations. It seemed to me they weren't sure if I knew just what regulations they were bending. When I was in the psychiatric closed ward of Fitzsimmons General Hospital, see the loony bin story. The only abuse I suffered, besides being there, was their dosing me with 1,500 milligrams of Thorazine 4 times a day. It was supposed to render you passive, but it made me even more active. Years later, a psychiatrist friend told me that practice of pacifying psychiatric patients was their way to warehouse patients rather than bothering to take the time to treat their psychiatric diseases. When I was researching the hospital's photo archive of the years I was there, they showed devices for electric shock therapy and water therapy. We know the questionable history of shock therapy. The water therapy consisted of a patient standing in a stall while a psych technician pounded them with high-pressure hoses. This therapy reminded me of the fire hoses police have turned on peaceful protesters all over the world, from Birmingham, Alabama in 1963, to the Chinese government blasting people in Hong Kong, recently demonstrating for the democratic rights they were promised when China took back the territory from the Brits in the 1990s. Although I did give the head of the psych ward a hard time when I was stuck on the closed ward, see Chapter 2, Loony Bin. He did not resort to either of those therapies, both of which risk serious injuries to patients. I believe I was lucky there because he didn't want any attention drawn to me as I was sent to the closed ward by the stockade commandant, not a licensed psychiatrist, which was an infraction of Army regulations I later found out from my civilian lawyer at my courts-martial. I was also lucky I wasn't beaten to death by an inmate I was forced to share a cell with by orders of that same commandant. He was a racist Texan who thought it might be entertaining to see an African-American psychiatric patient kill a commie, pinko, liberal white boy like me from New York. I was able to escape the psych patient's grasp when the military police guards intervened and saved my ass. This patient had recently murdered his first sergeant and his commanding officer. You might say he had a little problem controlling his temper. See Chapter 3, George Attack. In the story Blanket Party, you'll hear about a neo-Nazi crew of my fellow soldiers who decided I was in need of a severe beating for having the gall to insist on growing a mustache. The mustache in question I grew while on Christmas leave on the advice of my older brother, who was an artillery officer, who said, "They can tell you to trim a mustache, but not shave it off." When you are in the Army training, the Army tells you a lot of things they think they can get away with because you don't know all the rules. It took a full day of threats from every level of the chain of command, from the lowly corporal to the full bird colonel who was in charge of the 2,700-man medical training center where I was training to be a medic. Those threats included a 3 to 5 year stay in Leavenworth if I disobeyed the full bird colonel. See the mustache video about that fiasco to see how lucky I was. The mustache was just an excuse the neo-Nazis used to plan a blanket party for me, where a bunch of goons throw a blanket over a soldier in the middle of the night and beat him severely for not getting with the program. Soldiers have died in such vigilante attacks. Watch my blanket party video to see how my luck held out. "Get with the program or else" is a threat you often hear from the sergeants. And a blanket party is one of those things they rarely prosecute if done successfully because the victim cannot identify his attackers if he's covered with a blanket. It enables the neo-Nazis to be an unofficial disciplinary tool of the Army. That's why I was afraid of the Army. They break their own rules. Did you know it's illegal for a sergeant to hit a soldier? So he gets these goons to do it. That's why they look the other way when some weirdo from New York needs to be punished for growing a mustache and not conforming, not getting with the program. I kept resisting the program in nickel and dime ways, getting into minor scrapes with officers over chicken shit, abusing their rank until they threw me out. On my older brother's advice, I took the option of using a civilian lawyer for my courts-martial. My attorney bargained with the Army to give me an honorable discharge and GI benefits in exchange for not suing the officers who were punishing me in violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Some folks say, you make your own luck. Well, I made mine by choosing that civilian lawyer. That's how I beat the odds against the institutional bullies. You make them obey their own rules and insist on resisting. And a little bit of luck doesn't hurt.
Wade in the water, wade in the water, children, wade in the water. I was gonna trouble the water. I was in the army 1966. I was gonna trouble the water. With that damn army brass and their dirty tricks, I was gonna trouble the water. Wade in the water. I said, please, many times, show me the gate. I was gonna trouble the water. And all they said was, hurry up and wait. Wait.
Colonel Clancey. I'm gonna tell you about a daydream Clancey had about World War II. Some people might say I had it made in the shade. It was 1967, the war raged on, and I was stateside, not in Vietnam, but I was still in the damn Army. I was stationed at Fitzsimmons General Hospital, taking care of quarantine officers on the tuberculosis ward. And smoking Gauloise, a French cigarette with a big bouquet, was a way to remind myself there was a life outside somewhere. In a similar way, they swayed Colonel Clancey, retired military police. I was sweeping the floors of the TB ward, smoking my Gauloise and daydreaming about outside, somewhere. Puffing and sweeping and sliding along on those military deep sheen wax floors, and I heard, out of the blue, "Sullivan, come in here!" It was Colonel Clancey, yelling. I slid to a stop with my 4-foot wide broom. "Yes, Colonel? Problem?" No. Come in here and blow some of that beautiful stink around my room." Clancey had not inhaled the Gauloise bouquet since he was a 20-year-old soldier in France in 1945. "It's Paris. It's what all those cabarets smelled like. What a time that was. We were young. We were scared shitless. We were brave. The French loved us. And we were grateful. We were alive. We were pushing the Germans back across the Rhine. And people had hope. But those cabarets, that smell, that cloud of Gauloise smoke. Funny how little of that smell, you just walking by smoking it, and I was back there. Well, Colonel, I heard that your olfactory sense is the shortest route to your memory. Listen to you, Sullivan. Olfactory. You go to college or something? If I went to college, would I be stuck in this rat hole? Is that so? Well, Sullivan, you're the worst kept soldier I've ever seen. but you do seem to care about your job here. What's your problem? Just between you and me, Colonel, I hate the Army. All this chicken shit, spit and polish. What do you got to shine your shoes for? To shoot somebody? I just don't care about that crap. I care about the patients. Shit, they're stuck in here with me. It's like a prison guard and the inmates. I have just about 10% more freedom than you. You guys who are confined to ward. Soon you'll be out in the real world, on the men, retired, and laying up in the shade. You worry too much about bullshit, Sullivan. Do your time. Stay in line. And get out with an honorable. You're just looking for trouble. You're right there, Colonel, but I can't help myself. If somebody's acting like a bully because he's got rank on me, I call him on it. Nobody else is going to tell him. And they need to know they're full of shit. I'm doing them a service. I pick and choose which bullies to stand up to, of course, because it can be a dangerous game in this band army. Why don't they just fire me? I've asked them to. Sullivan, you're an accident waiting to happen. You're bound to run into the wrong man and make the wrong choice, especially in this man's army. You're a good kid, but you're too easy to read. Your heart's right on your sleeve, and you can't even see it. What you see is what you get, Colonel. I hope God has a plan for you, Sully, because your strategy is not too smart. Not to mention your poor guardian angel. He's got to be worn out with all the overtime he's got racked up watching over you. Well, we got plenty of time to straighten you out, but whenever you got one of those frog smokes, walk down this way and give an old soldier another trip down memory lane. Now, I got to take my afternoon nap, Sully. Be good. I'll try, Colonel. No, you won't. But take care. Colonel Clancey was intrigued by me, but couldn't understand my risk-oblivious behavior towards the Army. Later on, he would counsel me to shape up and shave a goatee I grew just to piss off our base commander into throwing my ass out of the Army. I got thrown out eventually, but I did have to wait for the hurry up and wait. They sure take their sweet time. Clancey went out of his way to visit me months later when I was thrown in the stockade, even though he was retired and off base and an outpatient at the time. I was really touched by this decent gesture. I wasn't aware until then that a military police colonel could be a human being. Sometimes. On the other hand, compare Clancey with the commandant of the jail where he visited me. The MP captain ran that stockade like he was the sheriff of a small town jail in East Jesus, Texas, where he found out I had black friends that I hung around with on and off base. He was ready to throw me in irons. Looking back on this saga in the year 2020, you might call this 2020 hindsight, Colonel Clancey was right. I was a wild 22-year-old kid running on rage and reflex. And when any alleged superior in the Army tried some chicken shit power play, I resisted, sometimes unwisely. So it was with the MP captain in charge of the stockade. He saw me as an it, a zero, a Yankee of the lowest order, a Negro lover. Being a friend of the Negroes was unthinkable to him and codified as illegal in his hometown in Texas. This was late 1967. Race relations in his bailiwick in the Army were closer to 1867. Oh yeah, and the Southern non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, etc., that trained us, they thought nothing of polarizing the troops even more than they already were, with their regional insults for Yankees, New Yorkers, and worst of all, Californians. They called them from the land of fruits and nuts. In one short insult, pairing their disdain for gays or anyone who might have PTSD. The Army culture was rife with this overcompensating, hollow macho, equating toughness with cruelty to anyone who might be vulnerable. I grew up with bullies. I still find them morally bankrupt. I was just as angry as they were, but more scatterbrained and loose. I grew out of my own inclination to bully. My resistance to the Army was guerrilla style, seat of the pants, improvised on the dime, but in for $1. My plan was to get out of this Army before it killed me. I was lucky with most of my choices. What to resist, who to piss off. But you don't want your life hanging in the balance on the whims of Lady Luck. 53 years later, I still need to tone down my anger, but my game plan would still aim at the same goals. We should have had an alternative option, like the Peace Corps, for anyone who didn't want to serve their nation for 2 years, propping up corrupt dictators halfway around the world for questionable political reasons. Most importantly, it's my perspective here. It's one of a rebel, a black sheep, who will always have an outsider's view of whatever social system you throw at me. Every day nowadays, there's a news item that proves you can't blindly trust the institutions we used to revere. I had the honor of being friends with one of America's most famous weirdos, cartoonist Gay Wilson. One Christmas dinner, we were talking about how the big banks in America conspired to pass the trash and undermine the entire financial system, driving it to collapse in 2008. I remember Gayan saying, "I'm 83 years old. I've been skeptical all my life." It turns out I wasn't skeptical enough. I grew up in a boot camp inside my home. My dad was addicted to nothing but cruelty. Casual cruelty, punching you for something you'd do sooner or later. His Catholic boarding school beat him into believing cruelty ruled, thumping his otherwise bright skull, thickening as he later thumped his sons. Now that does not excuse, but tries to explain how they drove the empathy from him. By the time I was a teen, I had PTSD. By the time I was drafted into the Army, I was unfit for military life. So said the shrink we'll visit later. When you were drafted into the Army, they made it clear they wanted nothing short of blind obedience. I had had my fill of that from my father in Catholic school and resisted the bullies like a matador without a sword, but I was still stuck in the ring with them. All of my stories illustrate the problem with absolute power. Humans cannot be entrusted with it. When these powers are criticized, they insist you not complain about the pain you're enduring. My answer to that comes from the Irish tradition and a song. "Whatever you say nothing," by Colum Sands, who graciously gave me permission to sing it for you. Whatever you say nothing when you talk about you know what. For if you know should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, and you wouldn't know how long. So for you know's sake, don't let anyone hear you singing this song. Colum Sands is one of my heroes for writing that song, because satire is one of the most powerful tools to use against bullies and tyrants. The ancient Irish said satire was so potent because it could unseat kings if people lost faith in them. Pete Seeger said he wasn't so sure of the power of his songs until people in power tried to stop him from singing them. He told me often he was blacklisted, and when he was blacklisted, it was the best publicity he ever got. I think Pete was whistling past the graveyard. One of his favorite stories about fighting back against fascists was of a concert in Barcelona, Spain, when Franco was still in power. A stadium full of anti-Franco Pete fans were waiting for him to start when some national secret police detained Pete and handed him a list of songs he was forbidden to sing. It was all the songs on his set list. He strode out on stage and waited for the thunderous applause to die down, and then held out the dreaded list of songs and said to a hushed audience, "I've been told not to sing all of these songs, but they didn't say anything about you not singing them. So I'll just strum my guitar and hum, and you can sing along." Pete sang for hours, and as usual, the audience all sang along while Pete just played the chords on his 12-string guitar. The police didn't have any instructions for Pete's reply. They stood dumbfounded and listened to the entire stadium sing along with the forbidden set list. So used to improvising with his life, Pete easily turned the tables on those obeying such strict instructions because he was taking orders from his conscience. He walked the walk. He sang nothing that night, but he strummed and hummed volumes. In response, I would sing, "Whatever you sing, say nothing." When they talk about you know what. Whatever you say nothing. When you talk about you know what. For if you know should hear you, you know what you'll get. They'll take you off to you know where, and you wouldn't know how long. So for you know whose sake, don't let anyone hear you singing this song.